So, hi, I'm Emily, pronouns she, her. I am the co-lead of Bethel CT Pride, and I am very happy to welcome everyone to our first Let's Talk Faith webinar panel. So this panel came across because over time, Bethel CT Pride has begun to work in really close alignment with various faith communities, something that's very new to us. We have hosted some events at the First Congregational Church of Bethel, which is led by Pastor Ryan, who you'll meet shortly. And we've also had local churches and temples reach out to us to be present at our big event, partner with us. And very recently, we've had a lot of institutions ask us, to promote or, make us aware of the events or programs that they're actually having themselves, which is very new to us. So within the 7 years that Bethel CT Pride has been around, I would say it's really been within the last 2 to 3 years that we've really seen an uptick in visibility from local places of worship to really kind of support the queer community. And because of that, that has increased the conversation both within our Bethel CT Pride queer community as well as the local community. So we really wanted to have a conversation about what is really the meaning of having an open and affirming or inclusive place of worship, as well as how does, faith and queerness really intersect. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel, which we have some amazing local thought leaders here. I'm going to ask them to state their name, their pronoun, and a little bit about themselves. I'm going to do it alphabetically. So we'll do Anthony, Rabbi Evan, Reverend Kim, and Pastor Ryan.
Thanks so much, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony. I'm currently the CEO of Circle Care Center here in Norwalk, Connecticut, and Glastonbury, Connecticut. I've been involved in religion, for most of my life. Growing up Roman Catholic, went to Catholic school from preschool until 12th grade, was an altar boy, confirmed, did the whole thing, and then swore off religion for several years, became a Buddhist, and then converted to the Episcopal Church in my early 20s after I graduated college. I've now been on the board of my local Episcopal Church here in Connecticut for about 10 years, on and off, doing 3 terms. I'm currently the treasurer there. I have been very involved in helping our church do outreach and just manage itself, given my experience in nonprofit management, which I do professionally for LGBT organizations. I also worked at Triangle Community Center, which is Fairfield County's LGBT community center, for 5 years, and interacted with a lot of open and affirming congregations during that time, which I appreciated. So I'm happy to be here with this group and speaking from my experience today. And pronouns he, him. I think I forgot to say that. So
thanks, Anthony. Now to we have Rabbi Evan.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Evan Schultz, pronouns he, him. I'm the senior rabbi of Congregation B'nai Israel here in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I've been here since 2012, started here as the assistant associate, and then in 2019 became senior rabbi here of the community, which I love greatly. And we have also been trying to foster a deeper partnership with the Triangle Community Center in recent years, and have brought in some of their trainers to do some work with our community, some education, which has really been incredible work and learning that we're trying to craft here. And also with Keshet, which is the Jewish LGBTQ plus group, kind of based out of Boston. So very thrilled to be here, and thanks for having me.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Reverend Kim.
So, hi everyone. I am Reverend Kim McNair. I am on the other side of the border. I'm in Westchester. I am untethered, so I don't belong to a congregation. I grew up in the National Baptist Church, which is not well known for being open and affirming. I have an ordination in the American Baptist Church, which is a little more open and affirming, but I've been preaching for the past couple of years at a church down in Hell's Kitchen, which belongs to the Alliance of Baptists, which is very clear that they are open and affirming. And that's where I found my preaching home. And I visit other churches when I need to be filled. And I am queer, Black, Christian, preaching woman. And it's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now Pastor Ryan.
Hi, I'm the Reverend Ryan Gackenheimer. I'm the pastor at First Congregational Church of Bethel United Church of Christ, and I've been here for about a year. And this congregation is an what we call in the UCC an open and affirming congregation. And as you heard from Emily, partnering with Bethel CT Pride on some different things, and so it's exciting to journey with this congregation as we grow what it means to be open and affirming and how we engage the community.
Awesome. Well, I am super excited to have all of you. I think we have a really cool cross section of different faiths and backgrounds. So I'm excited to get this started. So the first question is kind of open-ended and it's a big one, but what does an open and affirming or an inclusive place of worship mean to all of you? And when you answer, I really would love to know kind of, you know, how you make the community involved when you're considering being open and affirming or inclusive. How do you make that happen for them?
Okay, I'll jump in because I think it's a great conversation and there's a lot of perspectives on it, especially considering different denominations. But for me, you know, at our church, I think it's really important that to understand there's multiple layers to being an open and affirming congregation. And I think the first question congregations need to answer is to whom are you being open and affirming? And even when you are describing yourselves as open and affirming, always challenging yourself to ask, well, who else are we not being open and affirming to? But it's also very much needs to be rooted in a congregation's theology, first and foremost. So at my church, we have we call it radical welcome, but that's rooted in the idea of having an open communion table where someone does not need to be baptized or even Christian to receive communion. So that's actually a stance we've taken that's not in line with our national church that we feel really strongly about, because we think that's rooted in radical welcome and being an open and affirming congregation to everyone. So kind of starting with the theology there, what are your core beliefs as a congregation? And then moving up to, you know, the logistics of it, of welcome. So how are your greeters greeting people and welcoming them into your church every Sunday morning? What is someone's experience when they're sitting in the pews? What is their experience when they go to coffee hour after church? And what is their experience when they engage in those extracurricular activities? Are they feeling open, welcomed, and affirmed in their identity every step of the way?
Great answer. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure, happy to build on that. So much what you said definitely resonates in our community as well. I should add here, you're kind of representing the Jewish faith, but within the Jewish faith, there's sort of a wide, you know, perspective of ideas where the Reform Jewish community, which really prides itself on being very open and affirming, something that, you know, I'm very proud of to be part of this movement of American Judaism. I've actually been using the language lately, and this comes from Rabbi Adit Klein, who is the head of Keshet in Boston, but talks about creating a community of belonging. And I've been using that language a lot because tries to make sure that everyone not only feels included, but that they fully belong in the community. And it prompts us often, and as, you know, one of the leaders in our community, to constantly be reassessing, having conversations about what it means to be a community of belonging, and looking at everything from the walk from the parking lot into the building, to how you're greeted, to the messaging when you speak to one of our clergy, to what you see in our sanctuary, to the bathroom doors, to our leadership on our board, that LGBTQ plus individuals feel that sense of belonging here in our community, or part of the conversation, not only about issues that affect the LGBTQ plus community, but all the issues that a faith community engages with and deals with. So we really try to make sure on every level in conversations just around daily synagogue life that, at different, segments of the community are represented around the table.
And I would say it's, as someone who's untethered but is looking for a place or has found themselves in a place that is open and affirming, I can also say what it is not. It's not a place where you embody the idea of don't ask, don't tell. For many of us who are, whether we're lay or on the bema or in the pulpit, we're looking for a place where we can be ourselves. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean running up and down the middle aisle waving a flag either. It just means, is that a safe place for me to come with my partner or with my family, regardless of what my family looks like? Because what is on the church's website may not match up with what you encounter when you walk through the doors. I have a colleague who works with almost primarily Black trans folks, and she asked me about queer-friendly churches. And I was reaching out to some friends for their recommendations, and one of my friends said, what the pastor preaches is may be different from what you're going to encounter in the pew. So it's a little bit of both. It's when I walk in, do I feel a sense of, as Evan was saying, do I feel a sense of belonging? Are people greeting me, or are people giving me the hairy eyeball because they can't figure out who I am or why I'm there? So it's a combination of many things, but as someone in the community, it's what's the energy I'm picking up when I walk into that place, and can I just be myself? And coming out of a tradition where it was mostly don't ask, don't tell, it's nice to be in places where I don't even have to feel the pressure of being anything other than who I am.
That's a great answer. Pastor I, do you have anything to add to that? Because that actually dovetails really nicely into my next question, but I want to give you the opportunity to answer.
Yeah, if it doesn't throw us off too much.
Of course, yeah.
In the UCC, there's a process to become open and affirming that is usually about a year long of education, kind of looking at the bigger picture, and then really looking more closely, like what are the things we need to be more aware of? How can we live differently? How do we transform that welcome so it's really welcoming to everyone? And then what that looks like more practically at times is that folks are welcome into in the LGBTQ community, are welcome into the full life and ministry of the church. So everything from being the church moderator, which is kind of the lay head of the church, to Sunday school leader, to deacon, to leading worship. And theologically, for me, it means God loves you, not in spite of who you are and who you love, but because of all that you are and who you are. God loves you just the way you are. And so that shift to who you are is why God loves you, not putting that aside and then welcome you and put that aside. So.
Awesome. Well, these are really, I think, a lot of positivity and bring a lot of different perspectives, but I hope that, this is a great starting point for anyone who's maybe wondering, the first step of like, hey, I want to either pursue my faith, or to my next question, which Reverend Kim kind of touched on, how do you manage when someone sees that your church or your temple or goes to someone like you, Reverend Kim, who's kind of floating around but has this background and says, hey, either things have changed in my church and so I was excluded, or my family was excluded, or I'm perhaps finding my faith, or maybe I'm with a new partner who is at a church and I've never done that before. How do you kind of deal with that historical exclusion, and perhaps how that has either in practice you've seen that transform someone coming into the church, or how you would maybe counsel someone who is bringing that history or that trepidation with them when entering into a new space?
Yeah, man, the first thing I try to always meet people, in a space that's comfortable for them. And, whether that's here at the synagogue or out for a coffee or But I want whoever I'm meeting with to feel that it's a safe place, it's a place that they chose, it's a time that they chose, that it's because yeah, meeting with a faith leader, I realized meeting with a faith leader, uh, and that that could be something really challenging, especially if you've had really negative experiences in the past. And then for me, as Anthony was saying, I try to offer, um, texts from our tradition and offer theology that really affirms who they are. So for us, the passage from Genesis that all human beings were created in God's image. We try to live by that every day. And people, for people come share with me how there have been texts from our tradition that could be really damaging and hurtful and painful, and to also see that there's text and there's commentaries that are really affirming of who they are and that really celebrate who each person is and that each person is really created in the spirit of the divine. So if they do kind of want to see another side of faith, they do try to offer the ones that we live by. And actually, we have created sort of a set of values and principles for our community that we try to really put everywhere and live by and remind us every decision we make. And the first one is that text that each human being was created in God's image. And so that for us is something, we try to live by, and for people to see that that's how we engage one another always. So
I like the idea that you really kind of take the opportunity to reach out personally and work with someone on a one-on-one. Do the rest of you feel like that's also something that's potentially something you offer that people might not know is an entry point, or do you feel maybe that it's easier for people to maybe go to a program, or what would be that entry point, while still remembering the first part of my question?
I think I would affirm everything Evan said in terms of meeting folks where they're at, really hearing their individual story and affirming that that's their experience, and that unfortunately it's not probably a unique experience of exclusion in faith communities. And so again, meeting folks wherever's comfortable for them, out at a coffee shop, whatever. And so if folks just make contact and don't come into worship but want to meet somewhere, that's a great starting point. Or if they come into worship for the first time, offering to go. And then acknowledging those pieces of this church's and the larger church's history, to help folks be aware, because as faith leaders who are doing this work, like, we're reading those things, we're in the midst of this, but for the average person sitting in the pew, if they haven't been impacted by those stories, it's easier to not be aware of them. And so helping folks address those difficult parts of our faith, and how do we live differently into them without ignoring them, so that we can be a safer place, and more welcoming.
Well, that actually, again, I love this. You guys are kind of like dovetailing me nicely into the next part of my questions. So, I think the interesting thing when I was looking at the history, I was really fascinated that each different denomination, each different faith, and even sects within, each faith kind of came to this open and affirming or inclusive stance at various points throughout very recent history. So, just for the audience members, you all know this, but, I have 1985 is when the United Church of Christ kind of became more inclusive. I see the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists kind of began in 1993. Reform Judaism is sort of all over the map starting in 1977. There's kind of like different touch points. And the Episcopal Church, my understanding is 1976 is when it became inclusive to having folks in the flock, but really marriage equality seemed to really take on kind of affirmation in 2018. And so knowing that it's kind of new, and I think everyone's fairly young, so I don't think we're going to remember the 40s and the 50s. I might be throwing some bones here. I don't know, maybe some of you are like, 70, 80 and just look great. But, we may not have these memories of when things were really awful. However, as I mentioned before, in recent years, we've really been seeing an uptick in places of worship come to us. And it seems, I know FCC in Bethel, you have the flag. I know, Anthony, your church has the flag outside on things. how has that really changed people's perception of either the church or the temple, and how, has that increased or decreased attendees? Have you gotten pushback? How has that really changed in recent years?
Yeah. So I think, it's important to understand from like the Episcopal Church's history that in fact, like homophobia was actually a driving force of the church becoming more progressive. And it was after Bishop Gene Robinson was made a bishop, and I believe it was like about early 2000s, or early 2010s, around that time that, he became a bishop, and that there was a schism in the church, and many of the more conservative congregations actually left the National Episcopal Church at that time, which for those of us on the other side of things made the church much more progressive. And because it is a democratic system, then at that point there was a majority of support to pass more progress within the church, and new church canon and laws that made the church more welcoming to people who had been marginalized in the past. So that was like a shift in the Episcopal Church. It was not like the Episcopal Church your parents grew up in. A lot has changed in over the decades. And but for us, raising the rainbow flag actually was not something we did until much later for our congregation. I think we became radically welcoming in 2001, I believe, and it wasn't until I think maybe 2018 or 2019 that we raised a rainbow flag out front. And then in 2020 we raised a Black Lives Matters flag out front, and we still fly those two flags every day. And unfortunately for our congregation, flying the Black Lives Matters flag was much more controversial than flying the Pride flag. And that's again goes to my, what I said earlier about radical welcome. Being open and affirming is really looking at your blind spots as a congregation, and what work you need to continue to do, even if you have been open and affirming to queer people for a long time. Which queer people? Is it all queer people? And does that give you a pass to not do work on being open to other marginalized groups like people of color? So I think it's really important perspective. And both flags have gotten us a little bit of attention from the greater community, but for the most part, I think we just really try and live up to that in our experience as a congregation, really embracing wanting to be a diverse congregation. When people come to visit us, we don't want them to feel like they're the only blank person there, right? We want them to see people they can relate to, connect with, and also to meet people who are not like them, that have similar views, even if they have different experiences.
Has it impacted anyone else's, kind of congregation in terms of people dropping off, finding, growing that attendance? Like, how has that really impacted for you, Ryan or Evan?
Yeah, that happened before I arrived, so I just have it anecdotally. But certainly there was a group of folks who left the congregation during the open and affirming process of doing that work. And I have a biased opinion, but it transformed the community for the good and made the community more welcoming. I would say actually deepened the faith and helped folks be more clear about what it means to be a person of faith, and how to live that incredible and extravagant welcome that I believe God has called us to. And a question that comes up is like, oh, if we put the rainbow flag out, we're going to be overrun. It's like, if any faith community was overrun by people, wouldn't you be ecstatic to have we would be so excited if there was no room to sit because there were too many queer people or too many people of color or whatever, too many young people. Like, that doesn't happen. We have certainly had new people. Actually, our musician, who's our organist and music director, purely walked in the door because she was looking for a church where it was safe. And she walked in and they fell in love, and she's great. And so we have got new people, but also it was a journey that did some hard work to begin with.
Yeah, I'll add probably the biggest thing I've seen since I took over in 2019. I think our synagogue always tried to be a welcoming, inclusive space. Like you said, there's in Reform Judaism, there's not sort of a process of becoming a open and affirming congregation. I think the same way in some other faiths. But the Reform movement kind of follows, kind of the lead on progressive values in our country. So, I think the 70s and 80s and 90s, for sure, as far as I know, the history of our congregation, we for many years had an LGBTQ plus affinity group. And that actually, the fact that that's on our website, we get the most calls from that, people looking for a synagogue, and they say, it's on your website, you have a group called Kulanu is Hebrew, it means all of us. And we have a group called Kulanu. And since then, I think I've tried to build on that and just being much more open about the fact that we're a congregation of belonging. I think it was just kind of assume people knew. And the more learning I've done, so you have to really be explicit. If someone's coming into your building or someone's walking into your space to show that, we don't have flags, we have lawn signs. And we got lawn signs, but we have one out front. And one of the things I did, I put a big welcome sign in front that says LGBTQ safe zone right when you walk through the door. So I tried to just be more explicit about it, and still, to what many people are saying, we have to live it and act it, can't just put it on the door. We try to really constantly assess ourselves, make sure we are living it. But yeah, I get a lot more backlash on other issues than I do anything pertaining to really being open up front in front of our building, really explicit about being a space of belonging. I find the biggest challenge is, the more I talk to people, and I always, I have conversation when people come join the synagogue or ask about our LGBTQ plus programming. A lot of people are looking for different things. So some people maybe want to, find love. Some people maybe are looking for a group to have dinner with. Some people don't want to meet other queer people at all. They just want to come to synagogue, and they just want to meet whoever in the congregation. So, I try to just do a lot of listening, and not assume anything about any family or any individual about who they are, what they're looking for. And having those conversations helps to kind of help them find their path a little bit. So that I find is the most important thing too, just to really take time to listen and help them find their place in the community.
Well, it sounds like overwhelmingly having queer folks present is kind of like a strength. I mean, the more that you kind of make sure that it's welcoming, it seems like people come, and even if you have some folks drop off, whomever's left are the ones that you want there because they have the values that align with what you hold true.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in for a second, because Ryan twice in our conversation has used the word safe. And, I wonder how often pastors and lay leaders and, moderators and such are thinking about which groups of people, to Anthony's point, also are not safe. And of all the places in the world that aren't safe for queer folks, or people have been shoved to the margins, could the temple on Friday or on Saturday or on Sunday, the congregation, could that be a safe place? And if people are thinking of safety, protecting other people or providing a safe haven for people, whatever safety may look like, because it's going to look different between you and I. What's safe for me as a Black woman in this world, or a queer Black woman, is different. But just think about, how can we be a safe third place for people? I think that would lead to having different kinds of conversations of addressing previous exclusions.
Yeah, one of the questions that did come in, it actually touched on that point, was, I'm very much jumping ahead in my questions, but this is a great point, was, this is great. So as, these safe spaces grow, the need for safe spaces grow, do you also, all of you, feel as if, when we have our event at FCC Bethel, it's non-denominational. We're using this space. They give it to us for free. It's great. We love it. And they support us. but you can be atheist and come, and you can be anything and come. So as the need for safe spaces grow, do you also feel, and this is to every single one of you, that a church, a temple, or even a space, at a coffee shop with a conversation led by pastor, reverend, whatever, can be inclusive to anyone who's either simply spiritual or just not even spiritual at all, but is this maybe the shift to a new kind of safe space?
Well, I think, one thing that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of churches, not every church, but a lot of churches own significant amounts of real estate, and which can be used for good. And I think one thing is that people don't really associate religion with the LGBTQ rights movement, but it has been a huge part of that movement already. And it would, I think, help, more LGBTQ people to understand that while religion's done a lot of harm to our community, there have also been, religions and denominations that have stood by our community now for a long time. Sylvia's Place, one of the first LGBTQ homeless shelters in New York City, was started in the basement of an MCC church, I believe. So, there's plenty of examples like that throughout LGBTQ history of religion providing safe spaces. The reason I joined my church is because I was facilitating an LGBT youth group at the time, about 15 years ago, and they offered us free space. And that happens a lot when congregations have space to share and they see an opportunity for outreach. But there's still this perception, right, that most religions or congregations are not there for the LGBT community, and that's probably true. But we should still acknowledge the ones who are, and that there has been some supportive good that has come from religious communities supporting the LGBT community as well.
That's actually, I love these dovetails right into my questions. You guys are making this easy for me. Anthony, you bring up a great thing, which we got a question from the audience, which I will read specifically because I want to get the wording right, but kind of goes into something that I think we're all sort of probably thinking. So to your point, especially I would say the last year and a half, religion has been used as this divisive tool to justify really harmful, really political ads, legislation, but also it's, infiltrating just society with, this divide wherein there's this ideology, I think, in certain groups that you can either be queer or you can be religious, and they fight each other. So how would you counsel someone who is queer, who's maybe reluctant to disclose their faith out of fear of not knowing how to be both, and be safe and maybe find that place to be authentically their full selves in this current climate? And then I'll follow up with kind of the audience question that I want to read specifically that's similar.
I can maybe just give an example from my work with teens. So every year we take our teenagers down to Washington, D.C., our 10th graders, for a weekend, and they join with about 300 other teenagers from across the country. It's a very quiet weekend for sure. And they have an opportunity to learn about all of the issues that the reform movement lobbies around in Washington, D.C. So things, climate change, reproductive justice, and LGBTQ plus issues. And what's really incredible is that these teenagers have the opportunity on Monday to go to Capitol Hill and to share their voice of faith with our elected leaders. And it really, to your point, that teenagers over the years who have quite courageously and bravely spoken the voice of their faith and their identity proudly in our nation's capital. And I always find it an incredible model of what you were talking about, of being able to, the teenager is queer, wherever they identify to as Jewish or as a person of faith, and being able to live out about those values sort of like couched in the text from our tradition. So it's just one example, but you know, it's something for me every year that really it moves me in a way of the routines being able to do just that.
And Anthony and Kim, I mean, maybe from your perspectives as ones that have kind of evolved into faith, maybe what would you have said to your younger self or a peer in this climate of like, hey, you can be both? Like, what would you maybe wish you could have told yourself when you were questioning or before you kind of felt comfortable? If it's too personal, we can cut this.
No, I actually appreciate the way you reframed it to this question, because it's the, that comes up a lot. Like, what would you tell 17-year-old you? I would tell myself it's okay. Yeah, well, all right. So I should say it gets better, right? That's what we're supposed to say. It'll get better. But the fact is it will, and it did. I came out late in life, and I'm actually part of a group of folks who are later in life, queer women. And that question often comes up, like, what would you tell yourself about coming out? Because the fear in your tradition, in your faith tradition, there's a fear of rejection, that people are not going to love me anymore. And the fact of the matter is, when I told people when I came out, they were just like, okay, great. So where are we going for lunch? It was like it was like, yeah, Kim, we know, and it's all good and whatever, and let's go eat. And so I think I would tell myself, don't worry about it, because you're surrounded by people who love you. Even within the place that may not know how to love you. And I think that might be the issue, that folks just don't know how to love you because they have expectations. They've got texts, they've got all the messages that you have, and now you're bumping up against all of those messages, but you're still the person that they love. And so you will find, I would say to younger Kim, you will find your community, and your community will find you, and people will still love you. And above all, you're still fearfully and wonderfully made. That's like my favorite. People who know me are just, that's going to be like emblazoned everywhere when I go. They're just going to read. Remember, Kim always said, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Because it's true. And I would remind my younger self that, yeah, you're still fearfully and wonderfully made, and you're loved by a God who loves mightily. Every pore, every hair follicle, you're just loved. That's what I would have said to my younger self. And I get to say that to my 2023 self every day.
That's awesome. That was a great answer. I love that perspective. Anthony.
Yeah, that's hard to top. 'Cause I think Reverend Kim said it all right there. But I would tell my younger self that I think all of us have that kind of internal kind of gut feeling, right? And that inherent belief in who we are and what is right in the world. And I would, tell myself to trust that, and that religion can be wrong. Churches often are wrong, and what you believe to be right is right, and to trust yourself. And sometimes it takes a lot of bravery to leave a church and say, no, I don't agree with you, and you're not, no longer in line with my values. But it's okay to do, and it's probably the right thing to do if that's your situation. It doesn't mean you won't ever be a part of a church again. I didn't think I would be, and I didn't want to be. But if you believe in God, then sometimes God puts things in our path that are not things we are always seeking, but things we might need that can help us, and just being open to those opportunities. But I think now and later in life, for me, it's like it takes just as much bravery to be an openly, queer religious person as it did back then to be an openly queer person. So you have to kind of continue to hold that core belief of, I know what I believe is right, and this feels good to me, and sharing that with the people around you, and being proud of it, and not understanding not everyone's going to agree with you, but just kind of knowing who you are and what you believe is important.
And how do you, either you yourself or anyone, maybe counseling others, or Kim, if you've gone through this, when you maybe experienced a conversation where someone maybe finds out that you're religious, or they question that, or they counter that, how would you maybe address that, and not necessarily correct them, or perhaps correct them, but how would you kind of deal with that counter, that misconception that you cannot be both, that there's somehow you're um, letting one side of you down because of things that have happened in the past with the church?
You know, it's not something I feel like I personally need to reconcile and justify and explain, right? And it's like we cannot solve all the mysteries or issues in the world, but you know, churches are meant to be places of healing.
Mhm.
And usually when other queer people find out I usually go to church every Sunday morning, they make fun of me. And I usually laugh along with them, and you know, it's whatever. It's kind of the reaction I'm expecting most of the time. But whether they need religion now or might need that kind of healing and support in the future when they're going through a particularly hard time in their lives, you know, I hope they know that there are places they can find that comfort and healing. It may not be at church, but I hope everyone has somewhere in their life where they can go to feel a sense of healing and rejuvenation, like I do when I attend church. So, you know, that's just my hope for them. And I don't feel like I have to convince them. I just try and live out my life as an example for others.
Yeah, that convincing people, I've learned in my wise old age that I cannot convince anybody outside of me. I outside of my circle, my support. I can't convince anybody that I am. I can't convince anyone that I'm worthy of their love. I can't convince anyone that I'm worthy of their respect of me for having my inherent dignity or my humanity. I can't. And if I spent all of my time trying to convince people, I would miss out on how amazing life can be, even in the midst of the madness. So yeah, I don't. I am fortunate though that I'm also surrounded by people. Like I just started counting all the queer clergy that I know. And you know, that's I'm like, oh yeah, and this one and my bestie and this like so I know what is how could anyone possibly look at any of us and think that we're not doing it right? Like we're not how can you look at this Imago Dei and think, I don't know about that. No, it's all good right here. And so yeah, like Anthony, it's a waste of time, and that may sound pretty dismissive, but it really is a waste of my good limited time to try to convince anyone, you know, that I'm worthy of their love and respect. Just watch me live.
I think both of those answers are so vital and important. And I hope that anyone that watches this that maybe I think where my mind is going is to those, especially younger folks, or maybe the folks that are coming into their faith older and, you know, maybe facing opposition from their, you know, their peer group. I mean, I'm thinking kind of in actually a different way. You know, when someone, you know, elects and finds it within themselves to kind of stop drinking, and their whole entire friend group they go drinking with, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden they kind of have to switch it up, and you know, they shouldn't have to explain who they are. They should be present and proud of who they are. But sometimes you're just faced with, okay, well, how do I deal with that? And I love that both of your answers are like stepping in your power and believing yourself and being authentic. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing. And I hope that anyone who's watching this and is questioning their own authenticity, their own mind, their own heart, really goes, you know what, I'm going to just step into what I believe and just go from there and not let anyone bring me down. I think those were really, truly beautiful answers that I actually did not expect to be a little overwhelmed by. That was really cool stuff. So yeah, so I don't want to bring the room down, but I do want to ask this question that came in from the audience. Is a little bit, again, I know when we first started having this portion of the conversation, we were talking about kind of that political, divisive thing that's going on right now. And this question kind of speaks to that. I want to read it specifically. They asked, the Bible and New Testament in particular focus more on economic and social inequality and treating others with dignity. Having an open and affirming congregation ties directly into those lessons. Why do you feel some people have fixated on divisions based on sex and gender that run directly counter to the overall message of the Bible? So that came in and was very specific, and I would love if we could maybe touch on that. I know it's a little bit heavier, but
I can't be the one speaking the most as the one person who's not a clergy person, right? But I would just say to that person, there's a difference between following the teachings of Jesus Christ and being a Christian, unfortunately. Oftentimes in our society, depending on what denomination you're referring to, but that's the reality. And that's what brought me back to religion, is rooting myself in the teachings in the New Testament and realizing that that's not actually what every Christian church is espousing. And, I will just say another reason I don't try and convince anyone to, embrace religion is I really don't kind of buy into evangelism. I think that's something that has caused a lot of harm in the church, of trying to bring people to believe what we believe. And I just don't think you have to do that when your beliefs are rooted in those teachings of equality and social justice that Jesus, apparently said about 2,000 years ago.
I'll just add, I mean, I don't understand it. I'll never understand that point of view. But I will say, I think a lot of people try to seek order, and any human that doesn't sort of fit into their conception of order feels like chaos to them. And so they cling to texts that sort of help maintain a specific order or worldview. I'm not someone who ascribes to that or understands it. I think our texts create a lot of space for understanding human beings each for who they are, and each, as I said, as a divine creation. And usually I'll point to the text in creation that the first human being was sort of this person who was sort of crafted not with any particular gender or all genders, or if you want to translate it, and to say, look, the first human being was not man and woman, but was a much more complex being that sort of encapsulated all genders and understandings of who we are. And that's sort of our core text. That's the opening pages of creation. So to me, and the faith I live out, I can't understand why someone would not affirm or not love who someone is and how they understand themselves. But yeah, that's how I guess why they kind of need to see the world that way. But
So I'll name my own position as white, straight, Protestant male, who that group tends to be the perpetrators of that kind of hatred and violence. So my fear is that a lot of times it doesn't actually have to do with the faith at all. It doesn't have to do with the religion, because I think inherently it's a corruption of whatever faith system you claim to be working through. It's a corruption like this that has nothing to do with Christianity. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It's and my understanding, it's about power, and being able to marginalize someone else makes room for a small group of folks to have power, and targeting groups that they then choose to oppress against each other further isolates their ability to retain power. And through this country's history, as groups have been able to find a voice or claim a voice, that group of people who have marginalized others have had to move to quote, the next group of people to marginalize. And unfortunately, one of those shifts is to the LGBTQ people in this country. And that has then been co-opted through Christianity. When it didn't really take hold, the next step was to use the church to do it. And the church was very effective at being incredibly damaging and harmful and dangerous, and allowed it to happen.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think that one of the strengths of hopefully holding this panel and why, we felt like it was a good starting point for kind of our educational series, if you will, is just because these are the things that we see happening in the world. And it's sort of like you don't want to be a know-it-all or we know better, but I think oftentimes voices like your own, they're not heard. So there's a lot of uneducated statements and a lot of hurtful statements, like you said, Ryan, that are coming from places that are uninformed or just seeking power. And they're using kind of this weird low hanging fruit because there has been some history there, depending on denomination and things like that. But I really hope, and I think my whole group hopes that, by hearing what all of you are saying and knowing that there's the capacity to be queer and have faith and and it intersects and there are safe places that you can be your full authentic self. You don't have to fear every single time someone says in a Facebook post that they're going to church or that they're Christian or whatever they are, because there's so much more to it. I know, Kim, you wrote in the chat that, we contain multitudes. That's so true. And I think it's something that is often overlooked because we're in this quick society where you read something, you make some sort of judgment call so quickly, and then we're done. So I really appreciate all of the feedback that you guys provided. We're coming up on time. I want to leave it on a more positive note. So I have 2 questions. I'd love if all of you could answer it if you can. So the first question is, do you have a favorite piece of scripture that highlights inclusivity, either a quote or a section of text that you would love people to be able to reference, as well as do you have any suggestion on how to find a supportive place of worship, especially for folks that may not be from the local area? Truth be told, we actually have some folks from Kentucky. I see on the website there's someone from Sweden. We get people from all over. So, if they're maybe outside of the area, if there's any apps, websites, or just general information that you would love to share with how they can find that, that would be great.
Okay, all right. I'm really bad with scripture because I'm not actually a huge fan of reading the Bible, but I will say, one of my favorite characters, people from the Bible, is Mary Magdalene, and she's someone who I, as a queer person, who is someone who resonates with me from scripture as a queer person who Jesus really embraced throughout his life. In fact, there's many theories about how she's portrayed in our modern day understanding of the Bible and who she really was. Was she really a prostitute like the common story says, or was she actually just a single woman who was one of Jesus's most beloved disciples and who he kept very close to him throughout his life and was there with him until the day he died? And did they even have a romantic relationship? There's really interesting theories about Mary Magdalene, who she was and how she's portrayed and treated in modern day religion, that I think where people can look to and study and understand how that was maybe someone that we can relate to, that Jesus loved. And that's really all they need to understand. And for me, the second part of the question, I'd tell people that church shopping is a thing, and it's a really good thing. Try, if you're interested in going to church, try multiple churches. Don't be discouraged if the first one you go to is not the best experience. Try multiple churches that say they're open and affirming. They're not all going to be the same experience. They're not all going to feel authentic and genuine and like you feel good going there, but keep going until you find that church that you do feel good going to.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Rabbi Evan.
I've shared my the piece from Genesis. I also I've been drawn more and more just to the words of love your neighbor, and thinking of Judaism really as a faith of love. It's often not something that we think about in the Jewish faith as much, but actually our core prayer, the Shema, it's bookended by prayers of love, and to me, to offer love to another, to love my neighbor, to love the stranger. So much is encapsulated in just those few words. Something I've been preaching about more and more to my congregation. And yeah, seeking a synagogue or temple or Jewish community. Yeah, look on their website. Usually we'll have something there just as an initial or call and ask to speak to one of the clergy or the rabbis to learn a little more about the community. And as I mentioned, Keshet is a really great resource. I think the website is keshetonline.org, but calling there certainly as a great resource in the Jewish faith. If you have questions about a particular Jewish community or want to learn more. So highly recommend reaching out to them and supporting their work as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Reverend Kim.
So I also mentioned my favorite Bible verse, Psalm 139:14. I praise you for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And then the following verse says, wonderful are your works. My soul knows this very well. And works, so it's plural. So I am not the only one who is fearfully and wonderfully made. And I'm also not the only one who's reading that text. So the person next to me who's reading it is also fearfully and wonderfully made. So that you can't get any more inclusive than that to me. It's an anchor verse for me. And so if you're looking for a church, okay, so as a queer Black person, it's not just a church that's queer friendly, it's also a church that may be aligned with the tradition, and I'm using big air quotes, of the Black church because we're not a monolith, but I know when I go, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for a kind of song or a kind of just vibe and energy. So there is the Alliance of Baptists, which it may be, a mixed bag a little bit. There's also TFAM. And I'm going to mess this up, and you can look up TFAM, led by the Bishop Yvette Flunder. It's TFAM. Churches all across the nation, some in New York City and around in the tri-state area. I found a church in Newark because I went to the Newark LGBTQ Center, had an interview with a pastor who was the pastor over a queer church. So it was just through Google and of course word of mouth. Just talking to people, asking folks I know, where have you been? Where did you feel welcome? Where did you feel safe? And that's actually where I found one of the churches that I attend right now, St. Paul's Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn. Man, they, from the parking lot to the door, it's like a warm blanket. You just like keep moving. I love being there. So those are my recommendations.
Awesome, thank you. And Pastor Ryan.
When I think about this, I look at the stories of Jesus breaking down barriers, thinking about the woman when he sits and talks with the woman at the well that he shouldn't be talking to for so many reasons. When he has the encounter with the Syrophoenician woman who really redirects him because he gets it wrong, and she helps him figure out what it really means to live the extravagant love of God, where he welcomes the children and the disciples cast him away. And through the Hebrew scriptures, looking at the care for the orphans, the call for the widows and the vulnerable to be included. So really, for me, it's that meta narrative of that God is love, that God is love from beginning to end. And if God is love and we are created in God's image, then we have to be loved the way we are and the way God has made us. And who we are is a reflection of who God is and has created us to be. Coming from the United Church of Christ tradition, I know how to find the UCC churches easiest. If you go to openaffirming.org, that's our kind of parent organization for open and affirming churches. So you can search for ONA churches across the country, or if you go to ucc.org, you do Church Finder, it'll tell you if the church is open and affirming near you. And then, as everyone said, every church is different. So even if it is a great ONA church, it might not be the perfect fit for you. So try the next one over, or jump online. The incredible thing that has come out is a lot of churches, you can get a little sense of who they are without stepping in the door by watching their worship online. It's not the same as being there, but you can at least get a flavor. Is this a place where I might have a chance? And then take a little risk, give it a try when you find a place that might be okay.
That's a really great point. Thanks for COVID for making that a thing, right? Some good came out of it, right? But once again, thank you to all of you. I think this was a really positive thing, and I hope that anyone who's watching this, whether again it's someone who's seeking a place of worship, someone who's just spiritual and just trying to get an understanding of that intersection of queerness and faith, I think that this was really helpful, and I'm just so happy to have this conversation. And so thank you again, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your night.